Milan woke beneath a sky the color of restraint, a muted aristocratic gray that made every stone confess its weight. The city stretched like a creature taught to move elegantly in confinement. Trams sang faint metal songs at the edge of hearing. Shutters opened one sigh at a time. The morning smelled of wet iron and distant espresso, of concrete washed clean overnight and left to dry under its own self-consciousness. Milan never announced its emotions. It archived them. This was a city that preferred its longing ironed and stored. I left Navigli before the cafes stirred, before the world found its mirror. The canal was the color of burnt pewter. A few pigeons rehearsed chaos over the water. I stopped at a traffic light that blinked more out of habit than purpose and watched the rain gather on the windshield, each drop a confession too small to matter. My thermos cooled in the cup holder. On the passenger seat, the blueprint tube lay across the leather like a borrowed spine. Rigid, necessary, pretending to protect something fragile. The further I drove, the less the streets remembered warmth. Glass turned to stucco, stucco to moss, then to the long hush of cypress and wealth that had learned how to whisper. I rolled the window down an inch. Air entered like a correction. I told myself I liked this silence, this narrowing distance between precision and solitude. But solitude, like symmetry, has a way of revealing flaws you would rather keep aesthetic. Villa Orsini appeared between two rows of cypress, like a sentence waiting for its final clause. Cream limestone, black iron balconies, symmetry softened by weather. Fractures so fine they read as handwriting. Not damage, but authorship. It was a house that had known how to age without apology. The gate opened with the patience of money that knows it cannot be refused. The guard glanced at my plate and lifted his hand, an almost ceremonial acknowledgement, as if he had already been told my name and the shape of my role in the story. Gravel murmured under the tires, a clock unwilling to stop keeping time. I parked beneath an olive tree that had seen better architects than me, and worse men than him. When I cut the engine, the car ticked itself into silence. Rain ticked the leaves, tracing the grammar of weather. The house waited, the way certain people wait, still but aware of their effect, knowing observation is a form of possession. I stepped out and walked to the steps, heels sinking slightly into damp earth. My reflection trembled in a puddle before reforming itself, patient. I pressed my palm against the limestone. Cool, slightly damp. It gave nothing back, which steadied me. I kept my hand there longer than reason allowed. The surface did not care for empathy. Stone that refuses intimacy often makes the best confidant. Inside, geometry replaced welcome. Checkerboard marble underfoot. A staircase of iron curled into laurel and thorn. A chandelier that refused to lower itself to the human scale. The foyer carried the hush of a church and the vanity of a museum. The air smelled of polish, quiet, and something faintly electric, the residue of a place waiting to be judged. I began the ritual, eyes first, words later. My notebook stayed closed, my attention open, hairline fissures above a load-bearing arch, old, not fatal, moisture shadows like bruises along the east corridor, recent, tender. Plaster sinking over the music room in a gesture of exhaustion, like eyelids heavy from remembering too much. Buildings speak in language older than guilt. My job was to listen without interrupting. A woman appeared at the base of the stairs. House manager, late 40s perhaps, voice pressed crisp as starch. Signorina Ferri? Yes, he's in the library. He prefers to meet consultants there. Her tone implied that the room had opinions, and she respected them. We passed portraits that punished eye contact, their pigments faded but their judgment intact. The corridor narrowed, the light cooled. The library door stood ajar, a tall rectangle trimmed in brass, letting out a wedge of amber that looked deliberate. The air carried the scent of paper that had listened too long, of leather, and a touch of restrained arrogance. I entered quietly. The sound of my heels diffused into the Persian rug, leaving only presence behind. I set the blueprint tube on the walnut table, its surface a constellation of small scratches, each one a decision. I let my fingers trace a circular mark near the edge, the ghost of a glass once moved during a thought too heavy for words. I felt the temperature shift under my hand, the faint residue of memory embedded in varnish. My mind cataloged automatically, Original window mullions. Strong. Crown molding replaced but badly. The wrong hand. A lazy replica of honesty. Shelves dusted by fear rather than affection. Books aligned by height, not use. I opened my notebook, drew the failed molding profile, corrected it with 2 clean strokes. The pencil obeyed with a soft hiss. That small, specific sound of graphite meeting purpose. The door closed behind me. Softly. Decisively. Sound didn't end. It simply changed shape. "Camilla Ferri," a man said, tasting each syllable like a sentence he intended to amend later. I turned. Lorenzo De Laurentis stood near the window, the color of the morning stitched into his suit. He looked as if someone had told him stillness was power, and he had believed it long enough to make it true. The cut of his jacket made architecture out of anatomy. Shoulders built to carry arguments, lines disciplined to deny excess. His face carried symmetry severe enough to make ordinary rooms behave better. Eyes the exact blue of stone rinsed by rain, not pale, not warm, simply sure. He didn't smile, and that omission was its own form of respect. "De Laurentis," I said, keeping my voice even. "Preliminary reinforcement routes, plus the moisture report. The intrusion is assertive, like every unwelcome guest." He approached. The air obeyed him before I could decide whether I would. He moved like a verdict pretending to be a question. His gaze went to my notebook instead of my face. A kind of respect disguised as strategy. "You work in graphite," he said. "Graphite listens better than ink." He studied my hands, not for ornament, but for evidence. The absence of rings, the steadiness of grip, the angle of the pencil between my fingers. It felt like he had traced a fingertip across the habit itself. I wondered if he knew how intimate scrutiny could feel when it was stripped of flirtation. "Show me," he said. I untied the tube, unrolled the sheets. The paper unfurled with a sound between breath and surrender. I traced the load paths, explaining how the old beams lied about strength and how the new braces would teach them honesty. He leaned forward, not enough to cast shadow, enough to let the air change temperature. His breath grazed the edge of my temple, a warmth that considered the possibility of contact and declined politely. "We repair," he said finally, steepling his fingers. "But we don't lie. I won't have the house falsified to flatter a guest." "Repairs that lie don't hold," I said. "They collapse on cue." Something at the corner of his mouth considered a smile and withdrew. "Good," he said. "We understand one another." Understanding, I thought, is what people declare when they want a truce without terms. I nodded anyway. He walked me through the villa, the music room with its disciplined piano, the winter garden whispering secrets through glass, the east corridor swollen by denial, the west balcony that leaned toward the valley like a lover waiting too long for forgiveness. His presence moved slightly ahead of his body. The house seemed to adjust itself to accommodate his gravity. He kept distance measurable in centimeters, but proximity is not arithmetic. The body counts differently. There are magnetic fields between people who have not yet admitted they are dangerous. I matched his pace because matching is another form of refusal. At the grand salon, he stopped. The room was cathedral high, echoes folded in its corners. "This room," he said, his voice lower, slower. "We keep the echo." "The echo?" "It knows when someone lies, useful." Rain stitched the terrace glass in cursive. I almost smiled. The house didn't report it. We stood there, listening to the space listen back. The air between us carried that soft static before thunder. Anticipation, but with manners. Back in the library, the light had thickened into late afternoon amber. I laid a tracing sheet over the plan, drew a cleaner solution, let the graphite find its own rhythm. He watched, the kind of watching that rearranges your pulse without permission. "Again," he said. I drew it. The pencil whispered. The paper responded like skin. Every pressure recorded. Again. I drew it once more. His hand braced on the table beside mine, not touching, but close enough that warmth began to question its own boundaries. "You're not sentimental," he said. "No, but you're faithful. To the structure." He didn't answer, and silence took the shape of approval. The room, the man, the work, all aligned for one suspended instant. The villa held its breath. Outside, the rain resumed its quiet performance. Inside, everything stood exactly where it wanted to be, between tension and truth. We moved again, this time as two instruments discovering they had been tuned to the same key all along. The rhythm came unannounced, our pace, our silence, the synchronized sound of breath adjusting to corridor air. In the servants' passage, the ceiling hung low enough to demand humility. Old plaster peeled like paper skin, smelling faintly of soap and disuse. It forced the body into smaller geometry, shoulders angled, chins inclined, the choreography of submission disguised as necessity. Our shoulders brushed, an event so brief it rewrote the entire definition of accident. Static leapt across fabric, a quiet fever crawling up my forearm. Neither of us performed retreat. The air changed temperature. The corridor understood narrative. Physics bent politely and let psychology take over. We reached the library again, both pretending to have returned only for the blueprints. The room still smelled of graphite and rain. It had memorized our silence better than our words. I gathered the drawings with the care of someone packing evidence, not work. He stood by the window, sleeves rolled once, the posture of a man accustomed to commanding light. "Your first impressions?" he asked, as if the villa were a person whose reputation required defense. "It's lying about stability," I said, "but most beautiful things do." He turned slightly, studying me the way engineers study cracks, calculating depth, risk, confession. "And what do you propose?" "A full structural audit. East corridor first, then the roof over the music room. Moisture's been rewriting the story up there." He nodded once, slow, deliberate. "And you'll need access to everything? Walls don't yield their truths to third parties." "So, yes." A flicker at his mouth. Amusement or warning, I couldn't tell. "Then you'll report to me directly." "I don't report," I said evenly. "I document." He stepped closer, not to intimidate. He didn't need to, but to test the air between honesty and defiance. "Most people tell me what I want to hear." "I'm not most people," I said. "I'm an architect. You hired me to tell the truth, not to flatter it." Something in his expression eased. Approval, maybe, or the faint recognition that resistance is a kind of faith. "Good. I don't tolerate flattery. It weakens load-bearing structures." "Then this house should hold," I said. "It's full of resistance." His gaze lingered. "Including yours?" "Especially mine." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was architectural, measured, load-tested, capable of bearing meaning without collapse. He gestured toward the plans. "You'll begin tomorrow." "I already have," I said, rolling the sheets. Today was the foundation. That earned a half smile, small and undeservedly intimate. "You think in blueprints even when you talk." "Only when I want something to last." He watched me gather my coat. "And what is it you want, Signorina Ferri?" I met his eyes. "For the house to tell the truth. For you to let it." He inclined his head, the faintest concession. "We'll see which of us listens better." Outside, the rain had become deliberate, each drop an argument I didn't intend to lose. By the time I reached the car, my pulse had already joined the rhythm of the villa, structured, steady, dangerously awake. He scheduled our second meeting at dawn. Not a polite dawn, the kind softened by breakfast or birdsong, but the hour that still belongs to discipline, to people who mistake control for prayer. It felt less like convenience and more like examination, punctuality as confession, obedience as proof of worth. I arrived earlier, because reply is a language I speak fluently. Some people write letters. I show up before I'm expected. The villa was half awake, its vast body stirring with the restrained groans of age. The air tasted metallic with rain, the flavor of iron, patience, and stone. Lamps hummed in the corridor, their filaments still deciding how bright to be. The walls held a thin layer of yesterday's chill, the kind that makes you measure your own warmth in contrast. The library door was open, a wound of gold light in the dark hall. I entered quietly, though the floorboards already knew my rhythm. Inside, Lorenzo De Laurentis stood near the window in shirt sleeves. His cuffs were unbuttoned, the pale skin of his wrists reflecting the low light like porcelain catching its own memory. The watch he wore had no numbers. Time was measured by obedience. His tie lay folded beside an open book, a small act of disarmament that looked temporary. "You're punctual," he said, voice neither approving nor casual, merely factual, as if time itself had whispered to him that I was consistent. "I like to see a room before it remembers me," I replied. He regarded me with that same analytic stillness, the kind of silence that thinks in equations. His eyes had the clarity of someone used to seeing consequence before cause. It wasn't a stare. It was a study, translation work between languages not yet invented. The light on the desk was surgical. It dissected everything it touched. Dust motes, the grain of the table, the faint tremor of a page breathing under draft. I laid my folders down, aware of his gaze following the movement. Not for impropriety, he had no interest in theater, but for pattern. My hands, the arc of my shoulders, how long I hesitated before touching anything. He was learning my grammar the way architects learn gravity. Quietly, by repetition, I began the proposal. "Phase 1, I said, and the room seemed to lean closer. "Stabilize the east corridor's load path, then peel back the false crown in the library, the moldings lying. Strip the balustrade to its iron, prime with lime wash. The structure needs to breathe." He listened the way certain men interrogate, quietly, precisely. His attention never drifted. Each question arrived like the clean clink of crystal, exact, dispassionate, lethal in its neatness. "The corridor first," he said. "Why?" "Because truth should start where collapse begins. A pause, not hesitation, calculation." His head inclined slightly, the gesture of someone filing honesty under useful. "And if the structure resists, then it's honest." He leaned back, arms crossing. The movement stretched the fabric across his chest. Power became geometry. The faint hum of rain against the window filled the silence between us. "Explain this note," he said, circling a small symbol with the nib of his fountain pen, as if I were your most stubborn client. "You are," I said before thinking. His eyes flicked up, surprise, then restraint, then the faintest heat of amusement that never quite reached the mouth. "Very well," he said softly. "Indulge me, I did. I spoke of gravity as a moral force, of moisture as a patient thief, of wood that expands like arrogance and contracts like remorse. Words spilled in clean precision, each one another brick placed between us, or under us. I couldn't tell which. His face remained unreadable, but the stillness in his jaw betrayed listening. When I finished, he tapped once on the plan, a verdict disguised as acknowledgement. "We'll proceed," he said. "Your math holds." I waited for the counteroffer, the ritual dispute, the male need to test authority through numbers. "None came. You don't negotiate?" "I do," he said, eyes still on the plan. "But your numbers are clean." A pause, deliberate, waited. "And I don't like to insult competence." The compliment slid under my ribs and nested there. Recognition is a currency. I spent only the interest. He closed the folder, his movements spare, decisive. "Walk with me." We crossed into the winter garden, reflections fracturing across the wet glass. Palms whispered against the ceiling, leaves lacquered with mist. The air smelled of chlorophyll and iron, of the world before electricity learned to hum. Light sifted through dust like gold diluted with sorrow. "They tell me you're contained," he said suddenly. "They? People who feel entitled to define others before meeting them. And what did they say I am?" "Disciplined, precise, not warm." His gaze flicked toward me, appraising. "Loyal to the work. That's accurate." I meant it, though the word loyal left a metallic taste, like blood or nickel. "I prefer discipline to warm," he said. "Warm burns. Sometimes discipline does, too." The silence afterward wasn't empty. It had shape. It felt like standing near a fire that hadn't decided whether to consume or comfort. He opened the door. Cold air entered like a correction. Somewhere outside, a gardener coughed. Human punctuation in a sentence too long. He watched me step into the gray light. Eyes narrowed slightly as if testing how I altered the morning's composition. "Camilla," he said. My name sounded different in his mouth. Slower, heavier, drawn through consonants like silk through rings. The sound left a mark I would find later. "Yes. I expect excellence. I deliver integrity," I said. "Excellence follows, or it doesn't matter." His mouth shifted by a fraction, the smallest concession to approval. "We'll get along." He turned toward the terrace, but his gaze lingered a beat too long, measuring something that had no place in the blueprints. For a moment I remained where I was, caught in the quiet aftermath of professionalism that had begun to feel like performance art. Dawn had sharpened to daylight. The rain softened its argument on the glass. The villa, newly awake, began its daily breathing, wood creaking, marble adjusting, history exhaling. I gathered my papers, slower than necessary. His pen still rested on the desk where he'd left it. Black lacquer, gold trim, perfectly balanced. The kind of instrument that could outlive apology. I thought about the way he'd said competence, the precision of it, the absence of warmth disguised as respect. In my world, praise was often a weapon. But this was a recognition I didn't want to analyze too soon. Through the window, the garden trembled with light. He was outside now, speaking to one of the workers, sleeves still rolled, the gesture of command intact even at rest. For a man who avoided intimacy, he possessed an alarming fluency in presence. I left before he could look back. The drive home felt different in the early hour. The city was half-formed, caught between ritual and invention. I replayed the conversation in pieces, the tone when he said warm burns, the pause before integrity. I tried to file them as data, as neutral entries in the record, but language has temperature and his had left fingerprints. In the rearview mirror, the villa receded into mist, less an estate than an idea, an argument about permanence. My reflection looked strange against it. Someone composed, unshaken, but marked all the same. At a red light near Porta Genova, I touched the inside of my wrist where his attention had rested the longest. The skin was cool. I waited for my pulse to prove otherwise. When the light changed, I drove on, the morning widening like an equation I hadn't yet solved. Weeks lengthened into a rhythm defined by precision and avoidance. We moved inside time the way two metronomes tick when placed too close together, each subtly correcting the other until coincidence feels like control. We met in daylight, always the library, the smell of chalk dust and paper, the faint ozone of sharpened graphite. The lamps hummed with that faint electric warmth peculiar to expensive silence. Professional hours only. Immaculate emails, signatures drawn with military restraint, and yet the space between our sentences thickened, grammar starting to sweat. When I laid tracing paper over the plan, he came close enough that I could hear the shift in his breathing whenever my pencil pressed too hard. The sound barely existed, but the body is an archivist. It memorizes pressure long before the mind names it. His breath became a measurement I no longer needed to record but could not forget. One afternoon we argued about the staircase. The air between us felt denser than oxygen, as if made of some heavier element. "Expose the raw iron," I said. "It tells the truth." "Cover it," he countered, eyes still on the blueprint. "Truth corrodes. Only when neglected." He considered this, gaze narrowing to a calculus. Then he nodded once, decisive and unwilling. "You're right." The words landed like a coin reluctantly paid. Value acknowledged, but change resented. From then on, I watched his temper the way one watches the horizon from a cliff, both dread and fascination braided together. You study storms not because you want to escape them, but because you need to know when to brace. Late one evening, a supplier delivered the wrong glazing. The man apologized twice, breath already trembling. Lorenzo's voice dropped an octave, soft as wire, dangerous because it promised restraint. The room's molecules rearranged themselves. The supplier paled, apology imploding into silence before he fled, leaving the wrong glass in a lingering static. Lorenzo said nothing. He turned, rubbed his thumb along the banister, polishing a scratch invisible to anyone else. The gesture was obsessive, penitential, almost gentle. He didn't apologize. He never did. The house absorbed it. The villa had been designed to manage male fury. High ceilings for echo, thick walls for containment. I have known volatile men. I have learned the choreography of self-protection. Minimal movement, maximum awareness, the sacred art of seeming smaller without yielding. But this felt different. His volatility had edges, yes, but it also had grammar. The work itself stood between us like a mediator who refused to leave the room. Architecture became our chaperone, our witness, our leash. The discipline of restoration kept him civilized. It kept me brave. For a while, that equilibrium held. Two strong materials meeting at equal tension, neither breaking, neither yielding. At night, I carried the blueprints home. My kitchen table became geography. Coastlines of plaster, archipelagos of fault, oceans of silence. Coffee rings formed accidental halos around load-bearing calculations. I didn't turn on music. The only rhythm was pencil on paper, the soft rasp of thought translated into line. The house in my head spoke in the same calm tone I used with him. It was a tone for surviving. When the lead finally snapped, the sound startled me. I stared at the two halves as if they'd committed a small act of betrayal. I gathered them carefully into my palm, small relics of pressure made visible, and placed them in the drawer beside my spare keys, a private reliquary for all the things that break under care. Then I washed my hands, though graphite never really leaves the skin. It stays like memory, fine, gray, loyal. The next morning he met me at the scaffolding that hugged the east wing. The air still smelled of last night's rain, of metal, lime, and morning. Light struck his profile, cut marble, exhausted God. For a moment, he looked less like a man, and more like something carved to remind mortals of consequence. "You don't fear heights?" he asked, voice casual, eyes not. "Only when they lie about the view." He smiled, real, unguarded, quick as a pulse. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him, and for one impossible second it humanized him. Youth reappeared like a ghost that had kept the key. He looked almost reachable. We climbed together, the boards trembling beneath shared weight. The world below receded into abstraction. Up close, I could see the pulse at his throat, a visible rhythm under the collar, too fast for the rest of him. Wind toyed with his hair, and the smell of steel filled the air between us. He gestured toward the cracked arch. "How long before it fails?" "Months," I said, studying the fissure. "Maybe less. It's pretending to hold." He looked at me instead of the damage. "And you?" "I don't pretend," I said. "Then we're alike." The statement should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it landed like an uninvited truth, simple, indecently accurate. We stayed up there longer than we needed to. Neither of us spoke. Wind moved around us, uncertain which of us to touch first. The view unfolded. Terraces, the curve of the valley, the house watching its own surgery from afar. For a breath, I imagined pushing my hand into the air between us, just to feel what would happen. But restraint is a language too, and I'm fluent. When we descended, he held the railing, hand near mine but not touching. Static hummed between skin and metal. Proximity like a fuse, waiting. Inside, he poured coffee, black, unsweetened, careful. The steam rose between us, thin and disciplined. He held the cup out. I took it by the handle, not the porcelain. The difference between professionalism and confession can be as small as a fingertip. "Do you ever rest, Camilla?" he asked. "Rest is structural weakness." He laughed once, quietly. The sound startled him more than me. "Then we're doomed." The laugh lingered in the air like heat after lightning. For the first time I realized how long he'd been lonely. After he left, I remained in the library, cup cooling between my palms. The smell of coffee mixed with dust and chalk. I looked at the drawings spread before me, the geometry of desire disguised as engineering. Every line carried double meaning: tension, release, support. What was architecture but the management of longing through matter? I pressed a fingertip to the inked mark where the corridor joined the main hall. The paper yielded faintly. Every boundary does. Rain returned, striking the glass with polite insistence. I imagined him somewhere else in the villa, still moving through rooms that now carried my fingerprints. The thought unsettled and steadied me at once. That night, sleep came slow. I dreamed of the staircase, raw iron exposed, honest and dangerous. In the dream, the steps breathed. They exhaled warmth. Someone's voice, his maybe, said truth corrodes, and I answered, only when neglected. I woke to darkness, heartbeat still arguing the point. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer. The broken pencil halves lay where I'd left them, side by side like parallel lives. I touched them lightly. The graphite dust clung to my skin, soft and black, proof that something once applied pressure and left evidence. I closed the drawer and let the silence resume its rule. The villa waited for morning. So did I. Days turned into blueprints and storms. Schedules dissolved into a choreography of scaffolds moving and tarps breathing and pallets arriving with their rapt, mute intentions. Morning emails wore their suits. Evening emails loosened their collars. The villa learned our rhythm and began to keep time with us. Wood expanding at noon, iron cooling at dusk, marble clicking its teeth to announce temperature changes, as if the house were a body with its own carefully managed pulse. He began leaving his jacket on the chair nearest mine, a territorial gesture disguised as convenience. Sometimes his cufflinks lay beside my mechanical pencil, twin small moons in a plane orbit. Once his tie, ink dark, disciplined silk, coiled near my eraser like a sleeping thought. These were items that could be explained, that any witness would call incidental, and yet they altered the oxygen. The room recognized him even when he had stepped out of it. Fabric holds heat the way memory holds breath. I learned the timbre of his moods, the clipped tone that meant approval, the too soft voice that meant anger, the brief stillness before he turned restraint into command, the way his attention narrowed when he listened, the way his gaze sharpened when he judged. There was nothing sloppy about him, not even fury. He made even impatience look like strategy. Once he caught my wrist when I reached for a fragile sample of 19th century glass. Not roughly, precisely. His fingers settled with a calm, absolute intelligence, as if his hand knew my bones better than I did. "Careful," he said. The heat of his skin bled through my pulse. I felt the small, helpless gallop answer him from inside my veins, then remembered myself. He let go a second later, but the imprint remained, a quiet echo under the surface, as if a ring I did not wear had been temporarily engraved by touch. I catalogued the moment under hazards, unclassified. Noted, the danger in precision is how safe it feels. That night I dreamt of the villa breathing, every wall expanding and contracting with a heartbeat not my own. Doors inhaled and exhaled. The staircase sighed in sleep. The balcony ribs lifted and fell, as if the whole structure had finally admitted it was alive and therefore mortal. I woke with the urgent certainty that honesty is never quiet. It only learns better acoustics. Midweek he called me back after the workers left. The rain had downgraded from weather to mood. The villa was quieter than usual. Even the storm respected the hour and went to speak elsewhere. In the library, metal held the day's chill. Dusk hung in the air like an unspoken clause. "I've reconsidered the balustrade finish," he said from the doorway. "Show me the alternative again." I unfolded the plan. The paper took the light like skin takes heat, the top layer warming first. He came behind me, close enough for warmth to travel through my blouse like a rumor. The graphite point met vellum. I traced the line. The silence carried it. The room approved. His voice followed, low. "Why does precision look so much like devotion when you do it?" "Because they're related." His breath reached the back of my neck, an arrival that asked no permission because it made no contact. I didn't move. "And what do you worship, Camilla?" "Stability," he exhaled, a small sound balanced between amusement and hunger. "Then teach me that faith." The line on the page wavered. I pretended it didn't. I reinforced the stroke. The stroke obeyed. We stayed like that, two people pretending work was still the point, until the clock in the hall reminded us what hour it was willing to allow. He stepped away first. The absence rushed in as if someone had opened a door tonight. When the renovation entered its third month, tension became routine. Workers spoke more quietly around him. They learned the grammar of survival, the way apprentices learn fire. I adapted. I matched his tone, mirrored his economy of words, answered with numbers that carried no perfume. He noticed. "You calibrate to the room," he said one morning, watching how I stood to measure a span, how my shoulder aligned with the mullion. Like an instrument, like an architect. Same thing. He walked closer, expression unreadable, body absolutely legible. You make restraint look seductive. That's projection. Maybe. His eyes dropped to my mouth and returned, as if he'd tested a load and logged it. But effective, I didn't answer. Some victories exist only in silence, and I have never been careless with mine. One evening the generator failed. Darkness spread fast, luxurious, like wealth that had stopped apologizing. The library inhaled shadow. The hallway gave back the echoes we had paid to keep. I lit my phone. He lifted a candle from the mantel. The flame painted his face in copper in argument. You see, he said, the house prefers candlelight. It flatters decay. He smiled, a real crescent, almost gentle. It flatters truth. He held the candle while I opened the panel and checked the wiring. Light shivered between us, uncompromising. The glow revealed too much. The hollow of his throat, a small scar near his jaw I hadn't mapped, the heartbeat's small heave just below his open collar. In the reflection, my own face lived inside his pupils. The intimacy of physics, not confession. Power returned with a reluctant hum. The house resumed its practiced composure. We did not speak for a long time. Some silences are not pauses. They are verdicts. By late autumn, the villa changed temperament. Less wounded, more alert. The building began to ask for work rather than merely accept it. We could feel the shift. Screws that took their seat willingly. Plaster that set without sulking. Hinges that sang instead of argued. Restoration is a kind of resurrection, and resurrection always costs something. The bill arrives in breath, in patience, in the ache of wrists that have held too much weight with surgical courtesy. He started arriving without announcement. I would feel his presence before hearing him. A difference in air pressure, a recognition not unlike weather. Sometimes he watched from the threshold until I acknowledged him with an inclination of the head. Sometimes he joined me wordlessly, handing me tools with surgeon precision, anticipating which measurement I would need as if he had memorized the choreography of my reach. Do you always work this late? He asked once, when the house was a cathedral of quiet. I like buildings when they forget to perform. And people? Same rule. He looked at me for a long time, as if measuring the load capacity of that honesty, what weight it could bear before cracking, how much deflection it would accept without complaint. He said nothing. I appreciated the choice. The night before inspection, we reviewed the entire structural plan. The table was a sea of paper. The lamplight lay low and patient over its small, useful islands. Outside, the garden surrendered to fog. The cypresses stood like a council unwilling to adjourn. He poured wine instead of coffee. To precision, he said. To survival, I answered, because truth without endurance is just theater. We drank. The quiet thickened. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice almost gentle. You know what I admire about you, Camilla? What? You never flinch. I've had practice. I'd like to see what it looks like when you do. The sentence lodged under my skin like a thin, careful splinter. No blood, only insistence. The room noticed. The lamp's filament ticked. Somewhere the old pipes remembered winter. His gaze waited. Not a demand, not a plea. A sustained pressure, like a fingertip on a pulse. I felt the reflex rise in me. The lifelong habit of giving something back, buying tenderness with compliance. I did nothing. The moment elongated into usefulness. The wineglass left a faint ring on a cross-section. I blotted it with a tissue because stewardship is a reflex I prefer. When we rose, I gathered the drawings in order. He stood close, the polite proximity of colleagues rearranged by intention. The library door was half open. The corridor beyond held darkness like a glass might hold water. He looked at the door, then at me. Then he did the most careful thing I had seen him do. Camilla, he said, and let the syllables be an asking. I met his eyes. Don't lie. I won't, he said. He didn't reach for me. He waited. Waiting is a form of respect when performed by someone for whom waiting is unnatural. I closed the distance by the length of a thought. We stopped there, breath to breath, not touching. The room listened so hard it forgot its age. I could smell the wine on his mouth. Not sweet, but disciplined. "May I?" he said, almost as if the word itself might shatter. "Yes," I said, because consent is a structure and I build them for a living. The kiss was not a seizure of territory. It was a line drawn with perfect pressure, graphite finding vellum on the first try. He touched my face as if the bone under the skin were a blueprint he had studied and did not intend to alter. I felt the restraint in him, how much force he denied in order to make room for choice. I met him with exactness, not soft, not hard, but true. For a breath we were the same temperature, the same grammar. Heat rose through the ribs in a clean vertical line. The world narrowed to the small country between closed eyes. He pulled back first, not by command but by design, leaving air where his mouth had been so that meaning could stand. We stayed there, forehead to forehead, not touching because we were still touching. He exhaled. "So that is what it looks like," he said, voice almost hoarse. "When you flinch." "I didn't," I said, and realized it was true. He smiled, the quiet kind that belongs to people who have just told the truth and survived it. The clock in the hall remembered itself and struck the hour. Civility resumed. We stepped away together, like two acrobats who know exactly where the platform ends. When I left that night, the moon glazed the villa in silver. I stood by my car longer than necessary, not to dramatize, only to let the echo of something that had finally happened fade into an architecture I could live with. Breath in, breath out. It held. Weeks later, when the first scaffolds came down, he joined me on the gravel path. Clear morning, apprenticed sunlight, the smell of wet stone resigning itself to heat. "You've changed the house," he said. "Restored it." "No." He touched the column beside him, fingertips tracing the clean edge we had argued to keep. "You've made it honest. That's rarer." His gaze found mine. "Does honesty satisfy you?" "It keeps me safe." Safe is a temporary condition. So is power. He smiled, slow, the kind of smile that takes a step closer without moving. "We'll see." We stood there and watched a pair of swallows attempt a negotiation with the gutter. The house looked taller, not from pride but from accuracy. That night I sat at my kitchen table again. The plans rolled and tied like disciplined animals sleeping in a row. The drawer with the broken pencil waited, not demanding, simply present. I opened it. The graphite halves lay side by side, patient as bones. I touched them once, not to fix but to remember, the way you touch a scar to honor what it taught you without asking it to speak again. Outside, the rain began. First an argument with the awning, then a decision to forgive. Inside, every wall of my apartment felt newly alive, listening for a voice that had learned how to command silence without raising its tone. When sleep finally came, it brought an image I had not earned and did not refuse. The villa at dawn, light spilling through the east corridor, his silhouette in the doorway, sleeves rolled, eyes steady. No speech. Just the soft, undeniable gravity of a man who understood structure, because he had spent his life testing where it breaks. But the image did not ask me to bend. It asked me to choose. I woke before the alarm. The air smelled like yes. In the mirror, my face looked like someone who had chosen and could choose again. I tied my hair back with practical hands. The bruise of the kiss did not show. It would never show. The mark it left was under the bone, load path, not ornament. After inspection, the villa returned to its long habit of appearing inevitable. Papers were signed. Numbers were reconciled. Workers swore they would miss the place. They would not. The house settled with the audible satisfaction of a thing that has been put back into the truth of itself. There is a noise buildings make when they forgive you, small, quick, nearly mammal. He started arriving without his jacket, without warning, with tools he had no intention of using. Sometimes he stood in the library and read the titles as if reading were an act of mercy. Sometimes he watched me take notes and did not speak at all, as if speech would be vandalism. Once, when I was measuring a stubborn span, I felt him stop behind me, not to interfere, only to learn again how we inhabit distance. "Do you remember?" he asked quietly, "the night before inspection?" Yes. I've been undoing myself from that sentence ever since. Which part? I said. The part where I wanted you to flinch. I looked at the pencil in my hand. You wanted proof you could move me. I wanted proof I could stop trying, he said. And for once the room did not cough to cover us. We did not kiss again that week. Proximity has its own ethics. We worked. We argued over a railing detail and I won. He accepted the invoice without tragedy. He laughed, a low, surprising brightness, when a cat from the grounds trespassed and slept on the plan like a judgment. The cat left fur on an elevation. I let it stay until evening. A small private heresy. Every day the house looked a little more like itself, and a little less like an argument we were winning. The calendar changed color. Letters arrived. Someone important wanted to borrow the West Salon for an event that would have made the old villa preen. He asked for my opinion. I gave it, he followed it. There was something like trust there now. Not the easy kind, the engineered kind. The kind you test with weight and measure with time. On a Tuesday, while late light stretched itself thin across the parquet, he brushed past my shoulder on his way to the window. It was hardly contact. It might have been air. The old reflex rose in me. Catalog, assess, archive, and failed to file. Not hazard, not threat, not even warning. A notation, perhaps. A note in the margin that read, possible future load. Acceptable. That evening, at home, I opened the drawer and aligned the two pencil halves so their broken ends faced, but did not touch. The gap was precise. The gap was the point. The seam refused repair. I respected it. My apartment listened. The rain again began. I thought of the kiss, the fact of it, not the metaphor. How it had been neither seizure nor audition, neither threat nor plea. A kiss can be a hinge. Doors do not become something else when they swing. They simply admit and deny with better grace. I turned off the lamp. Dark settled with the authority of a well-made argument. Somewhere far away and near, the villa kept breathing. I let it, and when sleep arrived, it didn't ask me to prove anything. It laid me down like a plan that had finally agreed with its own line. And for the first time in a season's worth of weather, the night held without a brace. The next morning, I arrived at the villa before the staff. Mist still clung to the olive trees like a mood the night hadn't let go of. The gravel didn't greet me. It tolerated my presence. The house, as always, was already watching. I hadn't planned on looking for anything. Not really, but silence has a way of asking the wrong questions. And his silence. It had been almost gentle yesterday. Almost careful. That was the most dangerous kind. He met me in the main corridor, already in his shirt sleeves, already pretending this was a normal day. It wasn't. He stopped by an armoire, late, pompous, out of place. Pressed his palm to it, pushed. Wood groaned over stone. I joined him. The sound was intimate. Effort shared, breath aligning. We uncovered a recess, a drawer sealed by paint. He tugged. It resisted. You'll split the face, I said. Let me. The knife slid deeper, the edge whispering its slow persuasion. Old paint gave way like stubborn pride finally tiring of its own argument. Each flake drifted down. White dust settling over our hands, over the table, over the air itself, until we were breathing a century's worth of silence. There, I said, and the drawer sighed open. A tired, relieved sound, as if memory itself had been exhumed. Inside, a narrow strip of linen, browned by time. A ribbon, a small brass key, and a book, leather, thin, the color of forgotten blood. Its strap had been cut, not unfastened. Someone hadn't wanted to open it politely. He reached before I could stop him. Fingertips grazing the cover as though the object might accuse him by name. The name on the first page was written in looping, elegant script, Elena. I felt his body still beside me. Your mother? I asked. No. His jaw worked once, a muscle like wire. My ex-wife. I closed it carefully, the sound soft but absolute. He didn't take it back. He only pressed his palm against the wall above the alcove, mapping the pressure there like a man listening through stone. I slid the notebook back into the drawer. The sound was the softest betrayal imaginable. We'll rehang the armoire, I said, my voice too even. Protect the recess until protocol's clear. I'll have someone. We'll do it. We lifted together. The sleeves of our shirts caught for half a second, silk against linen, a friction that made memory out of motion. His breath landed somewhere near my temple. My heart betrayed me by translating it into thought. When the wood settled back into its dent in the world, he released last, punctuation claiming authority. Coffee arrived on a silver tray, as if the house refused to let the scene end without ceremony. He thanked the woman with a politeness sharp enough to cut paper. When the door shut, he slid one cup toward me. The porcelain radiated heat into the small, uncertain country between our hands. "You arrived early," he said. "I like to meet a room before it remembers me." His eyes stayed on mine. Deliberate, unblinking, a study disguised as conversation. Attention like that has temperature. It finds the thin skin near the wrist, the hollow at the base of the throat, the place behind logic where reaction hides. He drank. I didn't. The air between us began to rewrite itself, molecule by molecule. "You work in graphite," he said, echoing an old observation. "Graphite listens better than ink." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Listening is a dangerous habit in this house. Maybe that's why it keeps breathing. Something in the way he exhaled made me look up. There are moments when two people realize the next thing they say will change the shape of what they are. This was that. He turned the small brass key over in his palm. "Do you believe in coincidence?" "I believe in sequence," I said. One thing happens, another follows. We call it fate when we don't like the math. His mouth curved. The shadow of a laugh, the outline of control pretending to be humor. "You make even disbelief sound devout." "I restore what's already there." "I don't invent meaning." He leaned back against the desk, hands braced on either side. The fabric at his sleeves tightened. "And if what's there is ruin? Then I measure it, carefully." He studied me for a long time. The rain outside tapped its slow coat against the glass. One heartbeat, then another. Finally, he said, "You measure everything except yourself." I looked at him. That's why the house holds. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick as lime, setting. Later, we walked the corridor again. The lamps along the plaster walls flickered as if the current had started to doubt itself. The air smelled of wet metal and the faint sweetness of decay. "This passage," he said, "was built for servants. It's where the house hides its work. Every structure needs an artery that no one sees." He glanced at me, profile a line drawn in bone and light. "And what's yours?" "I don't hide it," I said. "I just keep it load-bearing." We reached the landing where the armoire had stood. The wall still bore the faint print of its absence, a pale rectangular ghost. He stopped there, facing it. "Camilla," he said quietly, like a man calling something back from another century. "Yes." He turned, stepped closer. Not sudden, not hesitant, just inevitable. The candlelight from a nearby sconce shifted across his face, giving his expression a geometry I hadn't yet learned how to name. "Every time you move," he said, "the air changes shape." "That's physics." He shook his head, one corner of his mouth fighting gravity. "That's denial." His hand lifted, paused, hovering near my jaw, not touching. "You're not afraid of me?" "No," I said. "You're predictable." "That's worse." He laughed softly, and it startled both of us. "You mistake control for prediction. And you mistake proximity for permission." The retort landed like the snap of a ruler on marble. But he didn't retreat. His gaze held steady, assessing, not conquering. He said, "Tell me to leave." I should have. Instead, I said nothing. That silence was the first real answer between us. He stepped closer, inches now. The scent of him, cedar, steel, and the faintest trace of rain, filled the narrow corridor. My pulse recognized the smell before my mind could translate it. "Camilla," he murmured, and the syllables folded the space between us. My breath caught. He saw it. He waited. I could feel the gravity of him, the slow insistence of a presence that had learned patience only recently. His hand lifted again, slower this time, the back of his fingers grazing my cheek as if touch itself required diplomacy. It was the lightest possible contact. Barely a movement, but the human body knows trespass the way walls know cracks. I leaned back, but not away. "You shouldn't," I whispered. "Probably not," he said. "But the house keeps teaching me that restraint is only beautiful when it ends." He bent his head slightly, not to claim, not to demand, to wait. The breath between us tightened, an invisible cord straining toward resolution. And then, because some structures must be tested to know they hold, I met him halfway. The kiss happened like a shift in weather. No warning, no escalation. Just inevitability finding its proof. His mouth was warm, deliberate. Not a question, not a conquest, an understanding. The air inside the corridor seemed to still, then deepen. The rain outside slowed, listening. He kissed me like someone who had studied blueprints and finally trusted gravity. I answered like someone who'd been holding her own weight for years and wanted, just for a moment, to let another force share it. His hand came to the back of my neck. The touch firm, precise. An anchor, not a claim. My fingers found his shoulder, then the linen at his sleeve. The fabric gave under pressure, softening into skin. For a moment, we stood inside the kind of silence that no architect can design, where time stops auditing itself and simply allows. When he pulled back, he didn't step away. His forehead rested against mine, his breath uneven. "Camilla?" he said again, my name tasting different now. "Yes," he smiled, a soundless confession. "You're not like anyone I've known." "Good," I said. "You'll have to stop rehearsing." I kissed him. He laughed quietly, and the sound felt like an exhale of the house itself. Old walls relaxing at last. We stood there, not lovers, not colleagues. Something suspended, half-formed, too honest to dismiss. The candle guttered beside us, spilling wax down its brass stem like time giving up decorum. Finally, he said, "We should go back." "Yes," I said. The rest of the night felt too quiet, like a secret had slipped between us. Not heavy, not yet, but present, like a scent you couldn't name. We returned to the library, adjusted the drawing lamps. His voice was steady as he dictated notes for the restoration ledger. I copied them, line by line, as if nothing had changed, but something had. Every sentence we spoke stayed safely behind its subject and object. No verbs like want, no phrases that left room for us. When our hands brushed over the plans, I didn't look up. When he lingered a second too long, I didn't pull away. We worked like two people pretending not to have crossed a line, and failing beautifully. When I left, the house followed me to the door, the creak of a hinge, the exhale of marble, the whisper of an ancient draft that understood confession. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was clean, thin, newly invented. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, posture stripped of theater. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," I echoed. But when I walked down the gravel, I knew something unarchitectural had shifted. The equilibrium between structure and desire, between restoration and ruin. The villa had changed its key, and in the long echo of my footsteps, I understood. Some houses are rebuilt to survive. Others, to remember who touched them first. Outside, the rain had turned silver under the lamps. Gravel crunched under my boots. The car's interior felt too human, too soft. As I slid into the seat, the scent of leather felt invasive, like memory made physical. I sat still for a moment, engine off, breathing into the quiet. My pulse echoed in places it shouldn't have. Driving through the wet streets, I saw the notebook every time I blinked. The name Elena, etched in looping, melancholic script. Written not just as a name, but a plea. An apology expecting to be forgiven. I turned the radio off. Silence was the only witness that didn't judge. The wipers swept the windshield with mechanical patience, turning rain into watery brushstrokes. At a red light, I reached out instinctively, placing my hand on the passenger seat where the blueprints rested. Rolled and bound like sleeping animals, warm with the residue of purpose. My fingers tightened around them. I imagined the lines they held, straight, obedient, loyal to their ruler. Unlike people, Unlike voices that break in the middle of sentences or names that tremble when spoken, the villa pulsed inside me. Not metaphorically, not anymore. I could feel it lodged between my ribs, as if architecture had become an organ I couldn't remove. Its air still lingered on my skin. Old wood, wet stone, something floral and broken. Sleep refused me, predictably. I left the lights low and unrolled the plans across the kitchen table. The lines swam in the lamplight, black veins on ivory. I redrew the corridor detail from memory, the one he'd watched me trace with that unreadable expression. Part reverence, part restraint. The pencil moved like it had its own will, guided by a breath that wasn't mine. When I stopped, my fingers were smudged with graphite. I pressed them to my lips without thinking. They tasted like dust and something harder to name. I thought of his voice, how it tightened when he said faithful. Not affectionate, not romantic. Faithful, like a contract, like something you sign in blood. It wasn't attraction, not exactly. It was recognition. That pull between two people who live by control, who construct their worlds brick by brick, and know, instinctively, how devastating it can be when a single one cracks. But the control was slipping. I had felt it, not just in him but in myself. The way my hand hesitated over the armoire, the way I had looked at the journal longer than I should have, the way I now sat in my kitchen at 2:13 a.m. tracing the shape of a dead woman's name in my mind, Elena. What did she look like? Was she like me? Did she draw? Did she love silence or simply accept it? He said her name with tension. Not pain, but friction. As if speaking it required effort. My ex-wife, he had said. Why did they separate? Whose choice was it? Was it loud or quiet? Was it a vanishing or an explosion? And if she left, did she take the best parts of him with her? I should have asked. I wanted to ask. But our relationship didn't have a name yet, and I didn't know the rules for questions in relationships that don't exist. Still, I imagined her. Not out of jealousy, but out of design logic. I wanted to know the original structure before the restoration. Was she reserved? The kind of woman who wrote her thoughts down because saying them would cost too much? Or was she theatrical? A storm in silk? The way the book looked. Leather-bound, strap-cut, pages like whispers. It didn't feel performative. It felt necessary, as though writing was the only way she could make anything real. The lamplight flickered slightly. I stayed still. Maybe the house knew something I didn't. My fingers twitched with the memory of it. The weight of the journal. The way the leather had folded where the strap was cut. I couldn't touch it now, but it touched me. Its presence hadn't left the villa. But it hadn't left me either. I kept replaying the moment his hand moved toward it. Not with grief, but with restraint. Not fear, not sorrow. Just the kind of quiet a man keeps when the past is still watching. I wanted to ask him everything. Why she left, whether he broke her, or she broke herself trying to stay. Whether the man who watched me draw was the same man who once let her write in peace. But I said nothing. And that silence somehow felt borrowed, like something Elena would have understood. I barely slept. The villa's silence had followed me home, heavy and breathing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that drawer again. The ribbon, the brass key, and the thin leather journal, its strap cut like a throat. By dawn, curiosity had become hunger. I told myself it was architectural, an instinct to study the structure of truth. But it was need, pure and unprofessional. When I arrived at Villa Orsini, the air was the color of hesitation. Mist blurred the cypress trees. The gravel didn't dare speak. The staff hadn't arrived yet. The house was mine. I climbed the staircase barefoot, quiet, deliberate, the way one walks inside a church after a crime. The armoire waited, obedient in its false place. I moved it with both hands. The old drawer gave a long sigh, as though disappointed to be disturbed again, and there it was. The journal. Elena. I carried it to the library, where light fell like confession. My fingers trembled slightly, a tremor not of guilt, but of anticipation. The first pages were letters, notes on dinners, renovations, guests, ordinary domestic archaeology, but the tone changed halfway through, as if the ink itself had learned fear. He doesn't shout anymore. He corrects. His silence has shape now, and it fits perfectly around me. He calls it love when he isolates me. He says he's protecting me from noise, from gossip, from the world, but the world was the only witness I had. Yesterday he apologized after pushing me against the wall. He said the wall needed to learn its boundaries. I think he meant me. My pulse stumbled. The handwriting grew erratic near the end, lines slanting as though written in retreat. He breaks things gently. My favorite vase, my courage, my reflection, always with tenderness, as if ruin is an act of care. I shut the book, but it was too late. The words had already entered my bloodstream. The blueprint was complete. Every line of him mapped in cruelty. Looking for something? His voice, calm, low, lethal, came from the doorway. I turned slowly. Lorenzo stood there, half in shadow, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, eyes unreadable. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. "Put it down," he said. "I had to know," I whispered. "You left it there." "It wasn't meant for you." He crossed the room in 2 measured strides. The air between us thickened. Old perfume and danger. "Did you read it?" "Yes." His jaw tightened, a muscle clenching like a hinge. "Then you should know how she lied." "You hurt her, Lorenzo." "That's all I need to know." He snatched the journal from my hands. Fast, precise, almost graceful. The leather made a small sound, like pain remembered. "She twisted everything," he hissed. "She was weak. Or maybe she was just alone." Something flickered in his eyes. Shame, then fury. "Don't you dare compare yourself to her." "I don't need to," I said. "I already know how it ends." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the pulse in his throat, fast, chaotic. "You think you understand me?" he said. "You think a few pages of hysteria tell you who I am? They tell me enough." He laughed, sharp, brittle, like glass under heel. "You wanted a monster, didn't you? So you could feel righteous. For running? I wanted the truth." "Truth." His hand slammed onto the desk beside me, inches from my face. "Truth is what the strong decide to keep." His breath hit my cheek, hot, unfiltered. The journal fell to the floor with a soft, accusing thud. "Leave," he said. For a moment, the world didn't move. The chandelier swayed once, like a witness trying not to react. His expression shifted, as if he'd only just realized what he'd done. "Camilla, don't." My voice came out calm, crystalline. "You've been building this moment since the day I arrived." He reached for me. I stepped back. The journal lay open between us, a single page fluttering from the draft. Her words stared up. Loving him was an architecture of erasure. I turned to the door. Now I understand what she meant. I walked past him, through the library, that still smelled of fear and polish, down the corridor where the walls had listened too long, and I left him standing there, a man surrounded by his own ruins, holding the proof that love built nothing worth saving. The villa watched me go. Every portrait, every echo, every piece of marble complicit in his silence. Outside, the air hit my face cold and clean, the kind that burns until it feels like baptism. The gate groaned open. Gravel broke its own stillness under my steps. Behind me, Villa Orsini stood motionless, a monument to control pretending to be beauty. I didn't look back. For the first time since I'd entered that house, I wasn't part of its design. It was close to midnight when the bell rang. Rain streaked the window like memory refusing to dry. I hesitated before opening the door. And then he was there. Lorenzo. No suit, no mask, just exhaustion wrapped in a drenched coat. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked unsure of what to do with his own hands. "Camilla," he said quietly. "I had no right to speak to you the way I did." His voice cracked, not for effect, but from use. I was angry, but not at you. I don't even know who I was yelling at anymore. He exhaled, eyes lowering. I keep rebuilding things because I don't know how to live with what I've broken. That night, he stopped himself, shook his head. I'm sorry, truly. I wanted to tell him to leave. Instead, I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, water dripping onto the tiles. The silence between us was heavier than any argument we'd had. I know you shouldn't forgive me, he said, but if you can't, I'll understand. I looked at him, at the trembling in his jaw, the faint bruise of sleeplessness beneath his eyes. He reached out, hesitant, fingertips barely brushing mine, a touch so light it could still be taken back, and kissed me softly. I didn't pull away. Weeks slid past measured in coats of primer, indecisions made with a nod instead of a sentence. Time stopped feeling like a calendar and started feeling like a texture, a fine dust that settled on everything we touched. We worked in rhythm. He, the precision of command. I, the devotion of endurance. To anyone watching, it might have looked simple. Two professionals, efficient, civil, unremarkable. But simplicity is often the camouflage of pressure. I learned his angers, the soft voice, the colder eyes, the refusal to repeat himself. And I learned his generosities, the way he signed a check, without drama, the way he listened when I said no, the way he spoke my name as if the vowels had corners that could cut. Sometimes, when I arrived before dawn, I could tell what kind of day it would be from the sound of his footsteps on marble. Fast, fire, slow, calculation, silence, danger. The house learned it too. Even the windows began to hold their breath until he passed. One evening, a storm rolled in from the north, shouldering Milan until the city flinched. The villa took the weather like a dare. I was in the east corridor, testing the carbon fiber strips we had anchored across the fracture. The air smelled of lime dust and ozone. My hair clung to my neck. The storm had turned the air liquid. He appeared without sound, tie loosened, shirt damp from the run between wings. For a moment I didn't turn. I just felt him, the heat of motion coming to stand behind stillness. How does it hold? He asked. Like a spine that finally believes in itself, I said. He looked at the strip the way men look at women when they believe themselves unseen, a kind of reverence blurred with appraisal. Good, he murmured. We walked the length of the corridor. Rain strafed the windows. The panes shuddered like stubborn thoughts refusing revision. At the far end, the plaster bulge we'd argued about had hardened into a permanent frown. I rapped it with my knuckles. The note rang wrong, a dull vowel that meant trapped air. Here, I said. We open it. Now. He glanced at his watch, though the gesture was theater. Now? Before the rain finishes the sentence, he half smiled, the kind of smile that knows the futility of arguing with conviction. Proceed. I scored the seam with a blade, the edge slipping beneath years of paint. He stood beside me, hands in pockets, posture of a mourner. The plaster gave reluctantly, then in surrender. Behind it, a recess lined in old paper, untouched, by moisture. A miracle of dryness in a house that had learned to absorb weather like grief. Inside, something wrapped in linen. The smell, almonds, dust, and time. I didn't touch it. I looked at him. He stepped close enough that the air between us warmed. He lifted the bundle with a care that startled me. His hands had never looked that gentle. The linen was tied with ribbon, already cut. When he unwrapped it, I knew before I saw the ink. Elena again, but later. The handwriting less sure, the lines rushed. The kind of writing that runs from something it no longer believes can be caught. He read. I watched his eyes move without movement in his face. The storm made theater of the glass. Lightning fluttered across the walls like film spliced too fast. After a minute, he closed the book. Enough, His voice had been filed to control. He rapped it again, fingers deliberate, almost tender. Something changed. Not invitation, not refusal. Just the subtle tilt of gravity when two bodies forget who's orbiting whom. It would have been invisible to anyone else. I felt it like a shift under the skin. "I need to brief you about the west balcony," I said, voice steadier than pulse. "It's unsafe. The iron tells the truth. The wood keeps lying. We should replace it entirely. Keep the iron. Lose the vanity." "You don't like vanity?" "Not when it collapses." He watched me for a beat too long, then nodded once. "Fine, do it." He watched me for a beat too long, then nodded once. "Fine, do it." I turned before the pause became something else. Walked back toward the main hall, slow, composed, the kind of composure that demands effort. He still loved her. Not in the way men admit to. Not in words or shrines or framed photographs. But in the way he held that book. Like it might fall apart if handled too quickly. I could feel it more clearly now. Not jealousy. Not heartbreak. Just the inevitability of it. That whatever was left in this house, in these walls, in him, I was only passing through. He'd let me fix the balcony. The part that showed. The part that could impress strangers. But not the foundation. The things that held him up. The things that could truly collapse. That part was still hers. He still loved her. And I was too broken to fix a broken man's heart. Maybe that was the cruel symmetry between us. He couldn't let go of what he lost. I couldn't trust what I might find. His grief had shape, name, pages inked in her handwriting. Mine was a fog, soft-edged, nameless, but no less suffocating. I had told myself this project was about bricks, beams, and restoration. That the tremors I felt weren't about him, but about history. But truth has a way of settling, like dust. Quiet. Relentless. I was in love with someone I didn't believe could love me back. Not because he wouldn't, but because I didn't believe I was someone worth choosing. Not over a ghost. Not over guilt. Not over a woman he still touched in silence. He wasn't even able to confess it to himself yet. But I saw it. A man's heart can only belong to one woman. And it would never be me. I was a placeholder. A buffer. The silence between the thunderclaps. The warmth before the cold returns. And still, I stayed. We started back toward the library. On the staircase, a worker, Gianni, was hauling a box the wrong way around. The corner clipped the banister with a crack sharp as a fracture underwater. Lorenzo stopped. Silence condensed, thick and immediate. "I'm sorry," Gianni stammered. "I didn't see—" "Don't apologize," Lorenzo said quietly. "Do it properly." Gianni nodded, pale, and fled. Lorenzo placed his palm on the fresh gouge, rubbed his thumb over it until the nickel gleamed through. A man trying to erase what reminded him of flaw. "The banister didn't deserve that," I said. "Nothing deserves anything," he answered. "That's not true." He turned. His eyes were winter blue, the color that erases distance. "Isn't it?" I didn't answer. Something beneath my sternum tried to escape. Anger, pity, maybe the old reflex to make myself smaller so the world wouldn't shout. I kept my spine straight and walked past him. The sound of wood splitting struck something older than memory. Gianni disappeared down the hall, but Lorenzo stayed. His hand pressed flat against the scar in the banister, thumb grinding the varnish like punishment. The movement was small, precise, terrifyingly controlled. I had seen that kind of control before. Not in men who shouted, but in those who could erase you without raising their voice. My father had that gift. His anger was never fire, it was gravity. You didn't burn, you fell. Plates broke, chairs tipped, My mother flinched and pretended it was the wind. I learned early that silence doesn't mean peace. It only means the storm is choosing its moment. Lorenzo's eyes caught the light just then. That same impossible blue that men like him inherit along with their temper. Watching him trace that wound in the banister, I felt the pulse of something obscene. Recognition. Not affection, not even desire. Recognition. I wanted to hate him for it. For the way his calm felt like threat. For the way my body remembered the choreography of flinching before my mind could name it. But hate requires distance, and I was already too close. Maybe that's what draws women like me to men like him. The illusion of safety inside the shape of danger. You think if you can survive their storms, you've earned the right to call it love. I stood there, heart drumming in that thin space between fear and fascination, and realized I wasn't drawn to Lorenzo because he was strong. I was drawn to him because he was familiar. And God, familiarity is the most dangerous comfort of all. Outside, thunder rearranged the sky. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind him. I watched his reflection in the glass. A man shaped by discipline until desire became a rumor in his posture. "Camilla," he said, without turning. "Yes, you stay here tonight." For a heartbeat, I didn't breathe. The words were soft, almost polite, and yet they carried that quiet authority that made refusal feel like defiance. "I can't," I said finally. "I need to leave. We're done here. I'll see you tomorrow at the grand opening." He turned, studied me. Not anger, assessment. He knew it was over. He could see it in my eyes. I nodded once, but my pulse didn't settle. I didn't want to stay. Not because I feared him, but because I feared what I might start needing from him. That house, that silence, that man, they all wanted to hold me the way gravity holds a falling thing. And I'd spent too many years trying not to fall the same way twice. That night, I drove home through streets washed pale by stormlight. At a stoplight, my phone lit. It was my sister. I didn't answer. When I finally went to bed, rain tapped the glass with the steadiness of a second heart. I dreamed of a house with walls so thin that when someone spoke downstairs, the ceiling whispered the same words back. An architecture of echoes, not shelter. In the dream, his voice reached me first. Then the sound of graphite breaking. Then the quiet, impossible sentence the house finally said. Nothing collapses without wanting to be held first. The night of the grand opening smelled like rain dressed in wealth. Flashbulbs, champagne, marble, all the things that convince people beauty means survival. Villa Orsini glowed like it had finally forgiven itself. Every surface gleamed. Every corner whispered obedience. The guests moved like perfume. Too bright, too close, too temporary. The house, restored and magnificent, was no longer a wound. It was theater. I walked through it silently, the architect no one really saw. My heels clicked across the marble like punctuation marks in a sentence already finished. They were all here, investors, curators, critics. The kind of people who praise ruins once they've been made safe to admire. I entered without being announced. That has always been my preference. Rooms speak clearer when they don't yet know you're listening. The foyer inhaled. The echo adjusted. Along the main corridor, portraits watched with their practiced mixture of boredom and jurisdiction. I moved through their gaze like weather. Every seam we had argued over held. The balustrade sang in iron, honest and newly bare. The east corridor, a season ago swollen with denial, stood true. Its spine stitched in carbon, its breath measured and calm. Guests called it elegant. Elegance is just accuracy with manners. He stood on the landing between the two grand flights of stairs. The geometry of his posture balanced on a single, precise degree. Black suit, white shirt, no tie, deliberate restraint. He looked like a decision refusing to blink. For a moment, he didn't see me. He was busy calibrating the evening, lending weight to conversations the way the house lends echo to words. Subtle pressure, quiet control. Someone laughed in his direction. He returned it with a curve so faint it counted as courtesy rather than joy. Our eyes met when the crowd shifted. A corridor opened and closed in one movement. Recognition crossed between us, unsentimental. I felt the old static at the base of the throat, the one that used to accompany proximity. It flickered and went out. What remained was clarity, clean and almost kind. I moved on. A curator stopped me to admire the plasterwork. A politician asked who had chosen the lime wash. A woman in bone silk requested the name of the artisan who had recovered the chairs in the music room. I answered factually, without footnotes. The villa didn't need me to explain it anymore. It could carry its own weight. In the winter garden, the palms whispered under glass, leaves glazed with a sheen of cultivated health. I stood near the ironwork we had elected to keep raw and listened. The house had changed key. Not louder, truer. Buildings that survive want to be believed more than they want to be loved. Camilla. His voice came from behind me, low, careful. I turned. He was standing just inside the greenhouse, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the faintest trace of rain on his sleeves. For a second, I hated that he still looked familiar. I looked at him. Not with anger. Not with softness either. Just truth. I needed quiet, I said. Noise gets mistaken for meaning. He looked at me for a long time, as if he could undo the last few weeks just by holding eye contact. You should be proud, he said. Everything about tonight. It's perfect, I nodded. It's finished. You don't sound happy. I'm relieved, I said. It's not the same. He stepped closer. I felt it in my chest before I saw it. The pull, the ache, that useless part of me that still wanted to close the distance. I stayed still. Camilla, he said softer. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. My voice came out flat, but my hands were trembling. I didn't know how to be with you without... He trailed off. Without controlling me, I finished for him. His mouth tensed. I was trying. You weren't. I swallowed hard. You were afraid of what it would mean if you let yourself need me. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch, and that's when I knew it was real. I still do, he said. Need you. I looked at him. This man I once built my world around. The tension between us was alive, breathing. I could still feel the weight of his hands on my waist, the sound of his voice in my neck, the way I used to forget where I ended when I was near him. But that wasn't love. That was surrender, and I wasn't surrendering anymore. I know, I said. He stepped forward. Don't, I whispered. I said it gently, not to hurt him. But to save myself. You're not angry anymore, he said. No. Then what's stopping you? I held his gaze. Me. He nodded slowly, like he finally understood what it cost me to stand still. I never thought you'd be the one to walk away. I didn't either, I said. But I am. His eyes were wet, but he didn't speak. He just let me go, and I walked out. Not fast, not dramatic. Just steady. The air outside was cold. I wrapped my arms around myself and didn't look back. Inside, people were still dancing. The villa was still standing. So was I. I did not fill the silence that followed. I have learned the cost of speaking for other people's admissions. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said, and the words were not thoughtless decorations, but weighted, like stones placed exactly where erosion asks for them. Not the kind of apology that buys permission. The kind that names what it did. I waited. I held you at a distance and called it respect when it was fear, he said. After you read that journal, I knew you'd never see me the same. He paused. I used restraint as disguise. He looked at me then, not for absolution. For witness. You were careful, I said quietly. But care can hurt, when it's only used to avoid contact. He didn't move. He didn't argue. You're hurt, I continued, voice low, but without accountability. And I'm hurt too, but not strong enough to carry it for both of us. He nodded once, as if a calculation had finally balanced in a column he hadn't been able to reconcile. I knew you would say it like that. Because it's true. Because you don't dig for sympathy, he said. And I heard in his tone the old admiration, stripped now of hunger. We stood with the villa breathing around us, the windows reflecting a room that had practiced being seen. A string quartet in the distance folded its melody into the architecture. He lifted a hand, then let it fall, undecided what gesture could hold the moment without damaging it. "Did anything about this us matter?" he asked. A younger version of me would have tried to soften the answer so it would not bruise. The woman standing here had retired from decorating facts. "It mattered that I learned when to stop repairing," I said. "It mattered that you learned there was a difference between control and care. And what did we learn about love?" The question wasn't dramatic. It was tired, intelligent. That calling a structure beautiful doesn't make it safe to live in. He closed his eyes briefly. The expression was not pain. It was a catalog closing at the end of the day. "I haven't been gentle," he said. "But I wasn't cruel to you." "No," I agreed. "Not to me." We let Elena's name remain in the air without sound. He looked away. I looked into the reflection, where my face had ceased to audition for any life but mine. "Tell me how to leave you well," he said. And for a moment the room forgot to pretend it wasn't listening. "By not turning this into a scene," I answered. "By not asking me to carry your regret. By letting the house be the last thing we share." The quartet shifted into something brighter to persuade donors toward their wallets. We remained in that small pocket of quiet, the way one does when the body learns a new shape for absence and discovers it doesn't break. "Thank you," he said, voice unembellished. He didn't touch me. We had exhausted our quota of contact and found the ethics that suited us better. Distance without disdain. I left him there, framed by windows, and a life that would continue to bow to his gravity. The corridor received me with the courtesy reserved for people who have finished their work. On the stair, I heard someone tell an anecdote about the Baroque cornice. I didn't correct it. The house could correct people now. It had its own vocabulary. The night had turned deliberate with rain. Under the portico, chauffeurs negotiated umbrellas with the sacred care of those who are paid to keep weather off of silk. I stepped into the wet without ceremony. Water annotated the stone. The taste of the air changed from rehearsal to after. Halfway down the steps, I paused and turned back. Not for him. For the structure, Villa Orsini no longer seemed to demand witnesses. It stood like a sentence that finally agreed with its own grammar. "You're welcome," I said in my head, and felt faintly ridiculous and entirely sincere. Gravel shifted under my heels, companionable. In the car, the leather remembered me without insisting I stay. Headlights made tunnels through rain. The drive curled like a ribbon being undone. In the rearview mirror, the villa reduced itself to a lit geometry and then to a principle. I let it. The city was a sequence of wet reflections. Traffic lights remade as watery organs, storefronts loosening their brightness into puddles. I didn't turn on music. Silence felt like structure again, not a threat. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breath held its line. At home, the key entered the lock with the kind of precision that makes gratitude feel like competence. The apartment greeted me with the small courage of objects that never asked to be metaphors. A lamp that worked, a chair that knew my shape, a window that kept out most of the rain and all of the performance. I laid my coat across the back of a chair. The room smelled faintly of graphite, and the clean chill that follows rain inside like an uninvited but harmless guest. I set my portfolio on the table and opened it. The last set of prints for Orsini lay there, rolled, tied, obedient. I unfastened the ribbon and let the paper unfurl until the plans claimed the table in a clean continent of intention. For a long moment, I just looked. The lines traced histories I could name now without being inhabited by them. The East Corridor detail, the iron balustrade section with its honest skin, the roof span over the music room, finally done telling stories that got the chronology wrong. I had spent months making these drawings correct. They had spent weeks becoming reality. They no longer needed me to carry them as proof. I took a folder labeled Personal from the shelf and placed the Orsini set inside. Not as a relic, not as a shrine. As closure with good binding. The table was suddenly a field of possibility. Blankness in my work has never been emptiness. It is space with its back straight, waiting for a first sentence. I pulled a fresh sheet from the stack and smoothed it under my palm. The paper warmed slightly, the way skin does when it knows it won't be asked to bruise. I wrote in small clean letters at the top right corner, Blueprint, a life that holds without needing witnesses. The title looked almost embarrassed on the page. I let it stay. Beneath it, I drew a vertical. Then I measured a span across it and marked the allowable deflection. Language I trust. Load, span, limit. I drew a second line. Parallel, respectful. A rectangle began to confess itself. A room with a window that admits morning but refuses spectacle. A door that opens inward. Shelves at shoulder height. A table large enough for plans and a bowl of fruit. A chair that allows the body to love its own weight. The pencil moved with the discipline of a habit returned to its true function. I paused only to adjust the light, not to steady my hand. Outside, rain softened from emphasis to texture. I brewed tea. The small, generous heat that corrects nothing and changes everything. The steam rose with no intention to mean. I left the cup on the sill to collect the window's chill and returned to the sheet. The floor plan turned to elevation. Elevation to section. I considered materials: oak because it forgives, linen because it breathes, iron because it tells the truth, glass because it admits light without needing to own it. My phone vibrated once, face down. It could have been a driver. It could have been a donor. It could have been no one. I let it stop. At midnight, the storm tired of itself and wandered north. The city resumed the soft electrical hum of people believing they are alone, while being surrounded by other versions of the same solitude. My small apartment held. I thought then, not of Lorenzo, but of the part I had played in the house of him. How easy it is for an architect to mistake repair for love, to believe that if the structure stands, the story deserves to be lived in. There is a nobility in restoration, yes. There is also a vanity that can spend a lifetime sanding the same rail in the hope that care will undo design. We could have continued. He and I, polite excellence by day, carefully rationed tenderness by night. Every argument drafted on vellum before it was spoken. The equilibrium would have looked like grace from a distance. Up close it would have been maintenance. I do not want to live where affection is a preventative measure. I closed my eyes and saw the West Gallery again. The reflection of us in the window, aligned but not touching. His admission, clean. My answer, unperfumed. No scene, no door slammed, no theater. The ethics of our ending might not be romantic, but they were merciful. When I opened my eyes, I realized I had drawn a stair. Not the iron confession at Orsini. A new one, wood, open risers, treads wide enough to sit on. A landing halfway up that serves no purpose but to offer a pause. I added a window at that landing, low enough to turn the city into a horizon, rather than a stage. I penciled in a plant that would survive my inattention. I wrote the word light, where the morning would find it first. The kettle clucked itself into silence. I drank the tea. The simple heat asked for nothing and did not suggest a narrative. I appreciated its professionalism. Somewhere after one, fatigue arrived not like collapse but like consent. I put the pencil down, turned the page face down, and let the room return to being a room. In bed, the sheets carried no metaphor. The dark was not a theater. Sleep came with the authority of a well-set beam. Before it took me, a thought passed cleanly through. We were an excellent argument, he and I. But good arguments don't always build good houses. The best ones teach you where not to live. Morning wrote itself in pale geometry across the ceiling. I woke without rehearsal. The city smelled rinsed. My body felt like a structure that knows its load and therefore moves without negotiation. On the sill, the tea had cooled into a small mirror that meant nothing and could still be looked at. I showered, dressed, tied my hair with the same practical hands that had drawn rooms for strangers, and finally drawn one for me. I put on the shoes that tell marble who is in charge. I picked up the sheet I had left face down and smiled. Not the smile of triumph, not of survival. The smile buildings make when their doors are opened, and nothing inside needs to be hidden. Later, I would send the final invoice. Later, I would answer 3 emails and ignore 1. Later, I would go to the market and choose fruit by weight, not by shine. Later, I would meet a friend and talk about a film in which the main character chooses decency, and therefore loses the plot, and therefore wins her life. For now, I stood at the table and wrote the line I had resisted the night before because endings don't like to be chased. I let it arrive. I wrote it small, patient, at the bottom of the page, where signatures go when they are promises to oneself. Some ruins deserve reverence, not rescue. Ours was one of them. The city would forget to care. The rain would choose its hour, I would choose me.